Got 100 Steps to Go. Tonight I'll Make It 99 by rayrae118. Chapter 17. By the middle of March, Harry and his friends thought they had a workable plan on how to get into Hogwarts. He sent a message to Minerva and asked her and Sirius to meet him at Potter Manor that weekend. He had kept in contact with Minerva as much as possible, sending messages once a week through the house elves. It was reassuring for both of them to have that point of contact, even if the only thing they wrote was that they were all right. Minerva and Sirius arrived less than a minute after Harry, and Sirius didn't waste any time in grabbing Harry in a tight hug. Harry held him just as strongly, incredibly happy to be able to see his godfather again. When they pulled apart, Minerva had her turn, before they all sat down and Harry explained the plan.
"We need to get into Hogwarts, which means we need to draw the Death Eaters out," Harry explained.
Sirius frowned.
"Why do you need to get into the castle?"
Harry sighed.
"We need the sword to destroy the Horcruxes. We also think there may be a Horcrux hidden in there somewhere."
They both looked startled, so Harry explained his reasoning for believing Voldemort had hidden a soul piece at Hogwarts. Sirius shuddered when he was done.
"It makes sense," he agreed. "It's creepy, and I really don't want to think about you going in there with all those Death Eaters. But I understand why it has to be done. What do you need from us?"
Harry took a deep breath.
"We need you to be the distraction. Can you get the Order, and anyone else who's willing, to engage the Death Eaters at a specific time?"
Sirius pursed his lips.
"A group of Death Eaters shows up at the Diagon Alley every morning. If you tell us when, we'll attack."
Harry nodded. They had kept watch on the alley as well, and had marked the contingent of Death Eaters that arrived daily.
"Keep your medallion with you. I'll send you the message when we're ready. It will be in a couple of weeks, most likely. We still have a few things to work out, but I'll let you know."
Sirius and Minerva knew that they needed to start contacting the Order, as well as others whom they thought might be willing to fight, either in person or acting as healers. Standing up, they said their goodbyes, promising to keep the other informed. Sirius clearly didn't want to leave Harry, but he knew that he had to continue trusting his godson. This plan was more than a little crazy, but it did bear the potential for victory. Once his former guardians had left, Harry returned to Lion's Castle and informed the others that they were on board and would deal with getting the Order organised. Over the next few days, Harry contacted Fred, George and Cedric, sending them short notes with one of his house elves. He didn't want to put too much into writing, but he did prompt them to keep the medallions he had given them on their person and to be ready for a fight. Fred and George, after reading and subsequently burning the message, sent the house elf back to Harry with a new set of transmitters. These ones were more developed and could work over longer distances. Upon reading the accompanying note, Harry was very happy to have such a tool. Fred and George had kept a few for themselves, which would be distributed as needed before the fight. And they assured Harry that the communicators would stretch the distance between Hogwarts and Diagon Alley. It was a definite improvement, as the range of the previous set had been limited to less than 10 kilometers. Harry sent another note, telling the twins to give transmitters to Cedric, Sirius, Minerva and Amelia, as they would probably need them the most. He sent another message to Cedric, telling him to go to McGonagall Castle to be included in the planning stage of this attack, before he began contacting members of the DA. He sent short messages out with Mimsy to most of the older DA members, warning them to keep their coins handy and to be ready to respond if they would want to help. He wouldn't force anyone to fight, but if they wanted to, he wouldn't say no. He told them that the end of the war was coming, and if they were willing to assist, they would not be turned down. After sending those notes, he passed on the master coin he had used since to set meetings with the DA over to Cedric, so that the older boy could organise the fight and lead the DA. 1 week after Harry had spoken with Sirius and Minerva, he received confirmation from his former guardians that they would be ready to do their part when the time came. This was relieving for Harry, though he still didn't want to launch this attack until they had a better plan on what to do once they got in. Drawing the Death Eaters out would do nothing if they got caught because they didn't know where to search for the Horcrux. They spent many hours brainstorming, but other than Ron suggesting the Slytherin part of the castle once more, they didn't really have any ideas. Harry shook his head.
I know it seems like a possibility, Ron, he said, turning to his friend, but there would be too many opportunities for someone to stumble across it and discover what it was. Voldemort wouldn't take that risk.
So where can someone hide something at Hogwarts that no one could find it? Susan asked, looking very frustrated. Harry pursed his lips, trying to come up with ideas that they hadn't considered before. Ginny huffed in annoyance. This is hopeless. How are we supposed to know every nook and cranny in the castle? It's not like we know what secret hiding places Voldemort may have discovered. Harry frowned, but didn't reply. An idea was niggling in the back of his mind. Ginny glanced at him, catching his pensive attitude. After a minute, she gasped, hearing where his thoughts were going. Everyone else looked at him. What's going on? Daphne asked. She was happy that her friends had such an amazing relationship, especially since they loved each other so much, but it was annoying to see them always knowing what the other was thinking. Harry focused on his friends.
A secret hiding place.
No one seemed to get it other than Ginny.
Think about it. We've discovered several secrets about the castle. There happens to be a room that very few people know about that is hidden from view until someone correctly retrieves the door.
Hermione gasped. The Room of Requirement! You think he hid it in there? Harry leaned forward in his seat, his eyes eager.
It's an idea. A better idea than what we've come up with before now. The Room of Requirement could be on the way to or from the headmaster's office. So Voldemort could have hidden it when he came to apply for that job. He would assume that only he had penetrated the deepest secrets of the castle. He smirked. He probably didn't count for other rule-breaking students who come along after him.
Ginny nodded. The Room of Requirement can become anything. Surely there's a room in there somewhere that is used for hiding things. Everyone looked stunned, though after a moment, Ron nodded slowly.
I guess you could be right. The Room of Requirement is pretty awesome.
Neville and Blaise chuckled while Ginny and Hermione rolled their eyes. Daphne frowned. It seems odd, though. Did Voldemort really think that no one would find the Horcrux? Harry sighed.
Remember how arrogant he is? He wouldn't think that anyone would be smart enough to figure it out.
Hermione nodded decisively. So we'll check the Room of Requirement first, then, she said firmly. It's certainly a more contained area than the searching of the whole castle.
Is the passageway you mentioned nearby? Blaise asked curiously. We've been talking about what we'll do once we're in. But it's all for nothing if we get caught before we can even make it onto the grounds.
Hermione nodded in agreement. He's right. The passage to Honeydukes, the one in the Shrieking Shack, they're all known to others. The passageway you mentioned is probably our best bet, but we'd still be risking a lot if we had to traverse the entire castle to get to the Room of Requirement. Harry shook his head.
It leads into and out of the castle from the Room of Requirement, so we don't have to worry about that. The entrance is in the caves above Hogsmeade.
That's good, Susan said. We'll be there already, so that eliminates one problem.
Harry nodded. Exactly. I'll contact Aunt Minerva and give her a time. Is next Monday all right?
They all agreed to the date, the last Monday in March, and headed to the dining room for dinner. The next day, Harry contacted Sharptooth and warned him of the impending attack on Diagon Alley, so that the goblins could be ready. Sharptooth sent a reply back with the house elf Harry had to carry the message, thanking him for the consideration, and telling him that the goblins would be prepared. Harry read in between the lines, and knew that the goblins would close and ward the bank against entry on the morning of the attack. He didn't expect them to get involved, but he knew that they would defend their bank, should the Death Eaters get too close. He sent another note to Minerva and Sirius, with the date and time of the attack, and received confirmation that they were set. Minerva told him of many of the oldest members of the DA were assuring Cedric that they wanted to help, and making their way to McGonagall Castle, so that they could all finalise their plans and be ready to go when the time came. With everything on their end organised, There wasn't much for Harry and his friends to do but wait. Minerva and Sirius had been very busy over the last couple of weeks as well. After speaking with Harry, they immediately contacted Moody, who had taken over as head of the Order, to let him know of the plan. Moody had been skeptical but willing to trust Harry's proposal, since it seemed like the kid actually knew what he was doing, at least from what the ex-Auror had observed over the last few years. Minerva also got in touch with several Hogwarts professors, as well as Poppy, and received confirmation that they wanted to help as well, so she told them to come to the castle. While the Order was being contacted, Amelia reached out to what remained of the previous Ministry and the Aurors. She, Minerva and Sirius had expanded Harry's plan, and decided that a two-pronged attack would be much more successful. While Sirius and Minerva engaged the Death Eaters in the alley, she would lead the Aurors, and a few others, to fight those who had taken over the Ministry. Once Harry gave them a date, they began firming up their plans. Minerva contacted several shopkeepers in Diagon Alley 2 days before the attack was to take place, and suggested that they spread the word to stay home that day. It was risky, but they all felt it would be the best to limit the number of innocent casualties. Fred and George offered their shop as a safe haven during the fight. When the Death Eaters had taken over the Ministry, they had cut off all Floo access to the alley, so the Order couldn't use the Floo at the Weasleys' Wizard Wheezes, but they could use the building as a shelter for the injured. The day before the attack, they were going to sneak in several healers who would remain in the shop during the fight, to be on hand for any injuries. All in all, everyone felt they were pretty prepared for what was to come. They had a plan, and they could taste the end of the war. All of those who gathered at McGonagall Castle knew what their task was fairly straightforward. Provide a distraction. Harry and his group would have the hard part. Not that many of them really knew what Harry and the others were going to be doing. All they had been told was that one way or another, it would be over tomorrow. Minerva and Sirius were really the only ones who had any sort of idea, and it was pretty vague at that. Harry had told them what they needed to know, but they hoped he had a better plan on getting to the remaining Horcruxes and taking care of Voldemort. But they trusted him, and if he said they were on top of it, then they would believe him. When it began to get late, Minerva insisted everyone try to at least get some rest before they had to engage the Death Eaters. Fred and George had already left with Snape. The Potions Master had recovered from his ordeal, and had insisted on acting as a healer at the battle. Narcissa, Poppy, Andromeda Tonks, and Druella Zabini, who had studied as a healer in her youth, had agreed to assist on the scene. If her son was going to be out there putting himself in danger, well then, so could she. She might not have as much skill in defense, but she knew a way around a healing charm. Cyrus had also gone with that group. After promising Astoria that he would return, the teenager was nearly hysterical at the thought of her father was going into danger. It was bad enough that her mother had been killed by Death Eaters, and her sister was off with Harry, doing Merlin knows what. But Cyrus would not stay out of this fight. He didn't think he could look his older daughter in the eye, knowing that while she had been putting her life on the line, he had been safely tucked away in a castle hundreds of kilometers away. While he wasn't as good as Druella and all the other healers, he was competent, and beyond that, he offered to act as more of a go-between, and in a more administrative capacity in their makeshift hospital. He would direct any wounded and carry messages between healers and the fighters. Most of the large gathering gave in and headed up to bed, rather than fight the stern woman who had taught many of them once upon a time. The only holdouts were Astoria and the Weasleys, who refused to leave before receiving word from the twins that they had arrived at their shop safely. The entire family, besides Ron and Ginny, and Percy, whose absence was still painful for everyone, was present and ready to fight. Charlie had been a shock to all of them, since they hadn't been expecting him. The dragon handler had stepped out of the Floo a few hours earlier with a roguish grin, telling them that Harry had sent him a message, suggesting he might want to come home for a family visit. They were grateful to have the second oldest Weasley child home, especially now. No matter what happened in the next 24 hours, at least the family was, mostly, together. Charlie was eager to return as well. He had received news of the war and the situation in Britain, and hearing of his brother's death had been a shock, especially since Percy had just come back to the family. That was one reason he had come home so quickly when Harry had let him know that the end of the war was coming. Whatever happened, he wanted to face it with his family. Shortly before midnight, Minerva's medallion warmed against her skin, and she pulled it out from underneath her dress. Reading the message, she smiled slightly and looked up at Molly and Arthur. They're safe and in hiding in their flat. They've set up wards to mask their presence, and they will see us tomorrow. Molly nodded tearfully, while the others relaxed. Soon enough they all headed up to bed. It was going to be a long day tomorrow. After dinner, Harry and Ginny headed up to one of the towers. The one they chose was open to the elements, and provided a fantastic view of the vast grounds. They sat at the edge of the tower, legs dangling over the edge, as they spoke through their bond and admired the clear night sky. So, what happens after tomorrow? Ginny asked, absent-mindedly playing with Harry's fingers, their hands entwined. Harry shrugged slightly.
I'm trying not to focus too far ahead, he admitted. Let's just worry about tomorrow first.
Ginny nodded slowly. Weren't you the one who said we have to have something to fight for? Harry bit his lip.
I guess,
he replied. Ginny grasped his hand tightly. So then, what are you fighting for? Harry turned slightly so that he was facing her head on. He smiled slightly and held up their entwined hands.
You. Us. We have a future together, Gin. You and me, we're gonna make it through.
Ginny nodded and leaned closer, snuggling into his side. I'm scared. Her mental voice was full of trepidation. What if we fail? Harry's response was fiery and determined.
Don't think like that. You know we've got a good plan. We can do this.
Ginny nodded again, and Harry sighed.
I'm more worried about the others.
Ginny looked up at him, not wanting to take the effort to actually pull away. What do you mean? Harry bit his lip.
We've pulled so many people into this. We're only one arm of this attack. What if something happens to Sirius, Aunt Minerva, Remus, your family? What about our classmates? I asked them to fight. It'd be my fault if they got hurt.
Ginny sat up abruptly and slapped him lightly on the chest. Harry James Potter, stop that right now. It is not your fault. Everyone here has made their own decisions. Professor McGonagall, Sirius, my family, and everyone else. They all made a choice to fight. You didn't force them to do anything. She smirked slightly. You're not all powerful, Harry, so stop pretending like you control the world. Harry wilted a little, but his expression was full of love and appreciation.
I love you, Ginny Potter.
Ginny leaned forward and gave him a kiss. I love you too, Harry. And whatever happens, tomorrow, after, we'll face it together. Harry nodded determinedly.
Together.
Hermione led Ron into her room without hesitation. Though their friends had chosen to utilize the same rooms over the last few months, they had abstained, not ready to take their next step, even if all they would do was sleep in the same bed. But tonight, Hermione wanted to spend it with Ron. Tomorrow was uncertain, and she wanted to be with her boyfriend. The two cuddled against the headboard, knowing that they should get some rest, but not ready to sleep just yet. Hermione bit her lip worriedly as she leaned into Ron's side. I'm scared, she admitted. What if it goes wrong tomorrow? Ron shook his head, holding his girlfriend close.
We can do this,
he assured her.
We've been practicing on training for months. Years even. And no matter what, I've got your back.
Hermione looked up at him and smiled. And I've got yours. Ron took a deep breath, staring into his girlfriend's warm gaze.
Hermione.
He hesitated. briefly losing his nerve. Hermione's curious expression spurred him forward, and he inhaled again.
I love you,
he said quickly, rushing through the words, as if he wouldn't be able to get them out if he thought about it anymore. Hermione gasped lightly, her eyes shocked, though there was a hint of joy there. Ron, of course, didn't see it, as his gaze was immediately drawn to his lap in his embarrassment. Hermione took a breath to steady herself, and reached out, one hand gently pushing his chin up so that he was forced to look at her. "Do you mean that?" she asked softly.
Ron gulped and nodded. I do, Hermione. I know it hasn't always been easy, and I can be thick and a right brat at times. But for some reason, you look past all that. I never know what to say or do to show you, because I'm not good at all that stuff. But I want you to know, before tomorrow, how much I value our relationship.
The words sounded slightly stilted and foreign rolling off the redhead's tongue, but Hermione had no doubt that he was being completely serious and honest. She smiled beautifully and reached down to clasp her boyfriend's hand. "I love you too, Ron." Ron stared, shocked, almost surprised that his feelings were returned. Hermione's smile widened. "Really?" Coming out of his stupor, Ron grinned and leaned down to kiss her. Blaise wasn't sure he ever really had seen this side of Luna before. At least, not completely. Sure, he knew she could be serious, and he knew that the aloofness was mostly an act. But he had never seen her drop that mask so fully. Tonight, though, the night before everything ended, one way or another, Luna showed no sign of her normal flighty attitude. The couple had spent the evening lying in the bed they had been sharing for the last few months. Not speaking much, simply reveling in the closeness, and trying not to think about everything that could go wrong. It was very late, when Luna's voice broke through the oppressive silence. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered, her silvery eyes seeking out Blaise's own dark ones, still visible in the light of the moon that shone through the window. Blaise clasped her hand tightly, a small smile making its way across his face.
"I will if you will."
Luna sighed and sat up slightly, resting her weight on one arm. "Okay, so just promise me that you won't take any unnecessary risks." Blaise raised himself up as well, and dropped the smile. His expression was serious, and reflected the weight of what they were about to do.
"I won't."
Satisfied, Luna nodded and lay back down. Blaise followed her a moment later, and the two tried to get some rest. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. So, the battle is the next chapter. Oh boy, but it's a nice chapter. I like how they're calling in all the cavalry. I always love that. How many people answer the call is amazing. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.